Imagine you're standing in your driveway when the tornado sirens start going off. The sky has turned a dark shade of green, and on the horizon, there's a tornado over a mile wide moving straight toward you. And you have exactly 16 minutes to take shelter.
Tornado warning. This is the most significant of all warnings.
On May 20th, 2013, that's exactly what happened to people in Moore, Oklahoma. 16 minutes after the warning went out, the tornado dropped to the ground.
Right here, you can see it right here moving to the east as we pan across here.
Over the next 39 minutes, it killed 24 people, flattened 2 elementary schools, and earned the highest rating a tornado can receive, EF5. Winds above 200 miles per hour, strong enough to peel a house off its foundation and leave nothing behind but the concrete slab. But after Moore, for the next 12 years, through some of the most violent storms in American history, not a single tornado in the United States received an EF5 rating. How is that even possible? Because those 12 years were anything but quiet. On the afternoon of March 3rd, 2019, a tornado nearly a mile wide came down in Lee County, Alabama. Beauregard was a rural community near the Georgia state line. Tall pine trees, quiet roads, and most of the houses are mobile homes. 53-year-old David Dean was in his mobile home, texting a friend to warn him about the storm rolling toward the state line when the tornado came down on his own house. Later, his son found his body in a neighbor's yard. 6-year-old A.J. Hernandez was torn out of his father's arms as the family sheltered in the safest place their house had. In all, 23 people died in Beauregard that afternoon, and around 90 more were injured. 10 of the dead were relatives from a single extended family who lived along the same 2-lane road, and 19 of the 23 were in mobile homes when the tornado came through. It was the deadliest tornado America had seen since Moore, and it was rated EF4. Exactly 1 year later, on March 3rd, 2020, a tornado dropped into Cookeville, Tennessee at 1:48 in the morning while everyone in its path was asleep, and the people closest to where it touched down had about 1 minute to take shelter. It stayed on the ground for just 8 minutes, moving at over 60 miles an hour. In those 8 minutes, it leveled 17 large, well-built homes, killing 19 people. 5 of them were children. Cookeville was also rated EF4. Beauregard and Cookeville had one more thing in common. Neither Alabama nor Tennessee sits anywhere near Tornado Alley. Tornado Alley is the stretch of flat, open plains running through Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, and there's a reason it got that name. Tornadoes need very specific ingredients to form, and this stretch of land happens to have all of them. The Gulf of Mexico pumps warm, wet air north across the plains, while cold, dry air slides down from the Rockies and Canada. North America's mountain ranges all run north to south, so there's no wall of rock anywhere to keep those two air masses apart. They meet head-on over the flatlands, in a collision that plays out almost nowhere else on Earth. It's the reason the United States sees more tornadoes than every other country combined. High above all of this runs the jet stream, a river of fast-moving air several miles up in the sky. Passes over one of these collisions, it twists the whole thing into rotation, and an ordinary storm turns into a supercell, essentially a thunderstorm that spins. What happens next is the strange part. A supercell can grind along for hours without ever producing a tornado. One storm drops a funnel to the ground, while another, nearly identical, never does. And even the National Severe Storms Laboratory, the government lab whose entire job is these storms, admits it plainly. The truth is that we don't fully understand why one storm spins up a tornado and another doesn't. Over the last few decades, though, something odd has shown up in the records. The old alley has been quietly shifting east. The western half of the alley sees fewer tornadoes than it used to, while the southeast, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, has been picking them up. And since 1990, strong tornadoes there have more than doubled. And that's not great news, Because the Southeast is built differently. Basements are rare there, mobile homes are everywhere, and the land is covered in trees that hide the horizon. So people often can't see the tornado coming until it's almost on top of them. And the supercells that spawn these tornadoes tend to arrive at night, when a tornado is 2.5 times more likely to kill you. But nothing about that slow shift away from Tornado Alley prepared anyone for 2011. In the last week of April, a single 4-day stretch, now known as the 2011 super outbreak, produced 367 tornadoes, more than any outbreak in recorded history. The worst of it came on April 27th, when 4 separate tornadoes earned an EF5 rating in a single day. More than 300 people died in those 4 days, and every one of those 4 EF5s touched down in Mississippi and Alabama. The new tornado country, the one with the trees, the mobile homes, and hardly any basements. Less than a month later, the same spring produced one more storm. It came down on a Sunday evening in late May on a town of 50,000 people in the southwest corner of Missouri, and it became the deadliest single tornado in modern American history. The name of that town was Joplin, and May 22, 2011 was one of the best days on its calendar. It was a graduation day. That Sunday afternoon, the seniors of Joplin High School walked across a stage in caps and gowns, and one of them, 18-year-old Will Norton, had posted on Twitter that morning, "I'm graduating today." By late afternoon, the ceremony was letting out, and thousands of people were driving home through a warm, humid evening, thinking about dinner. At 5:11 that evening, the tornado sirens went off. And there is one unfortunate thing about sirens in Joplin. People were used to them. In that corner of Missouri, 78% of tornado warnings turned out to be false alarms. Sirens had cried wolf so many times that most residents treated them as background noise. There was also a local legend, repeated for generations, that Joplin sat in a kind of protected pocket that tornadoes always split apart and passed around the town. So, when the sirens sounded, people didn't run to take shelter. They stepped outside and looked at the sky, or kept cooking dinner and waited for some kind of confirmation that this one was real. And unfortunately, the confirmation came at 5:38 when the sirens sounded a second time. By then, the tornado was already on the ground. It had touched down 4 minutes earlier on the western edge of town, and it was wrapped in rain. By the time it crossed into the city, it was 3/4 of a mile wide and still growing, with winds over 200 miles per hour, headed through the middle of a town where 82% of the homes had no basement, and where the city itself didn't have a single public tornado shelter. On Rangeline Road, 26-year-old Christopher Lucas was managing the Sunday shift at Pizza Hut. Lucas had served in the Navy. He had 2 young daughters, and his girlfriend was pregnant with their 3rd child. When the first sirens went off, he and the staff started calling people in from the parking lot. And then they saw it coming toward them. A mile-wide wall of black storm, filling the entire western sky. Lucas got everyone, 19 people in total, into the walk-in cooler at the back, the safest place the building had. But the door wouldn't stay shut. As the building came apart, the suction started dragging it open. Lucas wrapped a bungee cord around his arm, looped it through the handle, and held the door closed with his own body while the restaurant around them was stripped down to the slab. It held almost to the end. Then the door tore loose, and the storm took it along with Lucas and 4 other people. 15 came out of that cooler alive. One of the survivors later said, "The only reason we survived is because he held the door shut." A few minutes earlier, and about a mile away, Will Norton was on his way home from his graduation. He was driving with his father, Mark, in the family's Hummer H3, and his sister was on the phone with them, waiting at the house with the garage door open so they could pull straight in. She heard her father shouting at Will to pull over, and then she heard the tornado hit the car. It flipped the Hummer over and over. Will's seatbelt snapped, and the wind pulled him up through the sunroof while his father wrapped both arms around his legs and held on until his own arm broke. Mark Norton ended up in the hospital, while Will was among the hundreds of people reported missing across the city. 5 days later, on May 27th, he was found dead in a pond near the road, hidden under debris that had piled up on the surface. He was 18 years old, and he had been a high school graduate for less than an hour. The tornado also went through St. John's Regional Medical Center with enough force to shift the entire building off its foundation. Windows blew out across every floor. The backup generators failed. 5 patients and 1 visitor died there. Medical records and X-rays from the hospital were later found 75 miles away. A few blocks on, the tornado hit a nursing home and threw 4 cars into the building. About a dozen of the residents died. The tornado stayed on the ground for 38 minutes and cut through 6 miles of the city. The hospital, the high school those seniors had graduated from that same afternoon. Roughly a third of the town was gone. 158 people were dead. More than 1,000 were injured, and Joplin had become the deadliest single tornado of the 21st century. In the weeks that followed, Joplin learned how hard it is just to count the dead after a storm like that. Search teams pulled bodies out of the rubble for days. The list of the missing ran into the hundreds, and the official death toll climbed, dropped, and climbed again. The county coroner, Rob Chappelle, later explained the problem. Some of the victims were so badly torn apart that the same person risked being counted twice. Within days, the National Weather Service made it official. Joplin was an EF5, and it seemed like the one part of this story no one could ever argue with. Then, in 2013, a team of structural engineers from the American Society of Civil Engineers published their own study of Joplin. They had gone through the damage building by building, thousands of structures in all. 83% of all the destruction in Joplin was consistent with EF2 winds or lower. Not one building in the whole survey showed damage at the EF5 level. The highest rating on the scale rested on one small patch of destruction near St. John's Hospital, and the head of the local weather service office later admitted that there was only a very small area of EF5 damage. But hold on, how does the deadliest tornado of the century, a storm that moved a 9-story hospital off its foundation, leave behind almost no top-level evidence? Because of the way the EF scale works. The scale rates a tornado by its damage. Survey teams look at what got destroyed, judge how much wind that destruction took, and work backwards to a number, which means a building can only reveal wind up to its own breaking point. Most ordinary wood frame houses come apart at around EF2 wind speeds, and winds twice as strong leave exactly the same ruin. The rubble looks identical either way, and it can prove nothing beyond the moment the house gave up. Most of Joplin was built out of houses like that. The destruction was total, and almost none of it could count as evidence for an EF5. So, the deadliest tornado of the modern era earned its rating from one small cluster of buildings that happened to be strong enough and unlucky enough to record the storm's full force. And that entire system of rating traces back to one person, an engineer from Japan who became the most famous tornado scientist in history. Meet Tetsuya Fujita. He was born in 1920 in Kitakyushu, an industrial city in southern Japan. Even as a boy, he liked measuring nature more than almost anything else. As a teenager, he built his own wind measuring instrument, carried it up onto the roof of the family house, and sat there recording measurements while his father stood below, yelling at him to come down. He went on to study engineering, and by the end of the Second World War, at 24, he was teaching physics at a small technical college near his hometown. In September of 1945, 1 month after the atomic bombs, Fujita walked through Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a survey team. His task was to work out what exactly had happened there, using nothing but the marks the explosions had left behind. He measured burn shadows on walls and scorch patterns on bamboo. And then he noticed that a set of bamboo vases in a Nagasaki cemetery had been scorched on one side only, and that way he worked out that only a single bomb had gone off over the city. After the war, Fujita went back to his college and started applying the same skill to storms, mapping wind damage on his own, with no funding and no equipment. At some point, he translated a stack of his research papers into English himself and sent them to a famous meteorologist at the University of Chicago named Horace Byers. Byers read them and realized that this unknown teacher in Japan had independently worked out things his own team had spent years on. He invited Fujita to Chicago, and in 1953, Fujita moved to America, the country with more tornadoes than the rest of the world combined, and no good way of studying them. His moment came in April 1965, when a swarm of tornadoes tore through 6 Midwestern states on Palm Sunday and killed more than 250 people. Fujita spent days flying over the damage tracks in a small plane, mapping them mile by mile. Everyone had always assumed that a damage track like that was the work of a single, enormous tornado, but Fujita proved it was actually a family. Separate tornadoes spawned one after another by the same storm. 6 years later, in 1971, Fujita gave the world the thing it was missing: a scale for tornadoes. Back then, the official wind scale ended at 73 miles per hour. Everything stronger was simply called hurricane force. Fujita drew a new scale from that point up to the speed of sound and split it into 6 categories, from F0 through F5, each one defined by damage, because in 1971 there was simply no way to measure the wind speed inside a tornado. A tornado that tore up roofs was an F1. A tornado that leveled a well-built house was an F4. A tornado that swept that house clean off its foundation was an F5. The scale was adopted almost immediately, all across the globe. And here's the detail that's almost hard to believe. The man who invented it had never once seen a tornado with his own eyes. Fujita built the world's ruler for a phenomenon he knew only through its wreckage, and he wouldn't see a living tornado until 1982, 11 years after creating the scale. Fujita died in 1998 with a nickname that had followed him for decades: Mr. Tornado. His scale outlived him, and in 2007, American engineers updated it, recalibrated the wind speeds, expanded the damage categories, renamed it the Enhanced Fujita Scale, EF for short. But the update kept the one rule Fujita had been forced to invent back in 1971. Every tornado gets judged by what it destroys, and that tiny little rule would become the biggest argument in tornado science. 6 years after that update, in Oklahoma, the EF scale collided with the widest tornado ever recorded. It is May 31st, 2013. The air over central Oklahoma is soaked with Gulf moisture. The jet stream is overhead, and every tornado forecast in the country has been pointing at this spot since morning. Hundreds of storm chasers from all over the country are converging on the highways west of Oklahoma City. Among them was a team called Twistex, led by a 55-year-old engineer named Tim Samaras. In a profession full of adrenaline junkies, Samaras was famous for the opposite. Colleagues described his caution as almost annoying at times. His method was patient. Place low, armored cones called turtles directly in the tornado's path and let the tornado pass over them, recording the pressure drop inside its core. After 20 years of chasing, not a single tornado had ever touched him. With him rode his 24-year-old son, Paul, a photographer, and his longtime chase partner, meteorologist Carl Young. That morning, Samaras tweeted, "Dangerous day ahead for Oklahoma. Stay weather savvy." At 6:03 that evening, a tornado dropped out of the supercell near the small town of El Reno, about 25 miles west of Oklahoma City. For the first few minutes, it looked ordinary. And then it expanded from about a mile wide to 2.6 miles wide in roughly 30 seconds and became the widest tornado ever measured, before or since. A mobile research radar parked nearby clocked winds inside it at close to 300 miles per hour, among the fastest ever recorded on Earth. And the storm was nearly impossible to see. It was wrapped in rain, hiding smaller tornadoes inside itself, sub-vortices that circled the main funnel at over 100 miles per hour, like blades around a drill. It also refused to act predictably. Tornadoes usually travel in something close to a straight line at a fairly steady speed. El Reno sped up, slowed down, and then turned hard left, cutting across the very roads chasers were counting on to escape. One of the people caught on those roads was Richard Henderson, a truck driver from the nearby town of Hinton, a father of 2 boys and an amateur who had decided to follow the storm up Highway 81 that evening. At 6:05, 2 minutes after the tornado touched down, he took a picture of it on his phone and sent it to a friend. Then he called him. "I'm having fun," Henderson told him. "You might even see me on TV." A few minutes later, as the tornado made its turn, Slay heard a loud bang come down the line. Henderson asked, "Sonny, did you hear that?" And the call went dead. He was found that evening in what was left of his pickup. The Twistex team was on one of those same roads in a Chevrolet Cobalt, an ordinary compact sedan instead of their usual instrument-loaded truck. A recording recovered from their car, never released to the public, but described by the investigators who heard it, caught Carl Jung's final words as the rain briefly cleared around them. "There's no rain around here." Moments later, a subvortex ran over the car. Tim Samaras was found still in his seatbelt fastened. Paul and Carl were found half a mile away. It made El Reno the first tornado ever known to kill storm chasers, and to this day, the only one. 8 people in total died that evening. In the first days after the storm, El Reno was assigned an EF5 rating on the strength of the radar data. However, 3 months later, the rating came down, and the official word in the end was EF3. The National Weather Service does not accept mobile radar as evidence at all, no matter who measured it or how. 11 days earlier, those same rules had been applied 30 miles away in Moore, the tornado from the start of this story. Moore hit a packed suburb, thousands of houses, 2 schools, and a hospital. The surveyors there had plenty to read, and even then they were ruthless about it. John Robinson, a Weather Service meteorologist, later admitted that some members of the committee that wrote the EF scale believed no ordinary house, no matter how well it was built, should ever qualify for an EF5 rating at all. Several flattened homes in Moore that looked like textbook EF5 damage were downgraded to EF4 for one reason: the anchor bolts holding those houses to their foundations had been installed without nuts and washers. But the evidence that held up was enough, and Moore became an official EF5. Nobody in those survey teams could have known what they had just done, and May 2013 ended with a strange pair of records, the last EF5 anyone would see for 12 years, and widest tornado in recorded history, also the only one that has ever killed storm chasers, sitting in the official books as an EF3. Over the next 12 years, tornado after tornado would come right up to the edge of EF5. The first case came less than a year later. On April 27, 2014, a tornado tore through Vilonia, Arkansas, the same town a tornado had already flattened almost exactly 3 years earlier during the 2011 super outbreak. This time, 16 people died along its path. When the survey teams arrived, they found entire homes swept off their foundations, down to the bare slab, exactly the kind of damage that usually means EF5. The National Weather Service seriously considered the top rating, but then the surveyors looked closer at the foundations. The houses hadn't been attached with anchor bolts at all, and Vilonia's official rating stayed at EF4. Tim Marshall, one of the most experienced damage surveyors in the country, later acknowledged the uncomfortable part. The wind inside that tornado may well have been stronger than EF4. The houses simply weren't built well enough to prove it. A year later, the same story repeated in Illinois. On April 9, 2015, a tornado tore through the countryside near the town of Rochelle, killing 2 people and twisting a massive steel-grained silo, one of the sturdiest structures a rural landscape has, into a crumpled wreck. A research radar tracking the storm measured winds at EF5 strength, but the official rating once again came from the ground. The silo damage supported EF4, The fields around it weren't scoured the way an EF5 would scour them, and the official rating stopped at EF4. By then, the same question had started coming up on forums and in comment sections. How does the tornado capital of the world go this long without a single EF5? And the most popular answer was the simplest one: money. The theory went like this. An EF5 label makes headlines. Headlines bring lawsuits and bigger payouts, so someone, somewhere, leans on the survey teams to keep the ratings a step lower. It's a tidy explanation until you look at how insurance claims actually get paid. A destroyed house is a total loss. Insurers pay for damage in dollars, and the category of tornado changes literally nothing. And the people who assign the ratings are government meteorologists who don't answer to insurance companies at all. The missing EF5s had to have another explanation. For 6 more years, violent tornadoes kept landing one step below the top, until the storm that put the whole question on the front page of every newspaper in America. By the winter of 2021, America had gone 8 years without a single EF5, and of every violent storm in those 8 years, the one that came on the night of December 10th remains the most controversial. By then, tornado season is supposed to be long over, but that week, the South was living through record December warmth. Humid, spring-like air sitting over Kentucky 2 weeks before Christmas. In the town of Mayfield, Kentucky, the night shift at a candle factory was working overtime. It was the Christmas rush. Mayfield Consumer Products made scented candles for stores across the country, and about 110 people were working that Friday night. Tornado warnings had been sounding all evening, and some of the workers wanted to leave and ride the storm out at home. According to multiple employees, supervisors told them that leaving meant losing their jobs. One worker later repeated the exact words he says he was given: "If you leave, you're more than likely to be fired." The shift kept working as the sirens went off outside. The tornado reached Mayfield just before 9:30 at night. Inside the factory, a sheriff's deputy named Robert Daniel was on duty, supervising 7 inmates from the county jail who worked shifts there on a release program. When the alarms went off, Daniel moved through the building, herding the inmates and dozens of workers into the shelter area, a hallway in the middle of the factory. The tornado hit the plant dead on and brought the entire structure down on top of them. Steel beams, roofing, industrial machinery, cars from the parking lot. All 7 of Daniel's inmates survived. Daniel himself was caught under the collapsing building and died in the rubble. Under the rubble, a worker named Kayana Parsons Perez did the only thing she could think of. She started a live video on Facebook so that anyone would know where they were.
I don't know who's watching. We got hit by a hurricane. I'm at work in Mayfield, and we are trapped. Please, y'all, get us some help.
Around her in the dark, people were screaming and praying. She kept talking, trying to keep them calm. And at one point, she reminded everyone that her 40th birthday was a couple of hours away.
We're going to be fine, and we're going to be out tomorrow, y'all. My birthday is in a couple of hours. It's almost 10 o'clock. Y'all going to sing happy birthday to me?
And under 5 feet of collapsed factory, her co-workers started singing.
Happy birthday! Listen, y'all got to sing happy birthday to me.
Rescue crews pulled her out just after midnight on her birthday. But unfortunately, 9 of the people working that shift never made it out. And what the company did afterward became a story of its own. Mayfield Consumer Products denied that anyone had been threatened with firing, dismissed the workers' accounts as false, and then, a month later, shut the plant down for good and permanently laid off half of its 500 workers. The tornado itself, meanwhile, was rewriting records. It stayed on the ground for almost 3 hours and carved a track 165.7 miles long, the longest December tornado track ever recorded. In the first days, it looked even bigger than that. Early reports treated it as one continuous tornado running more than 250 miles across 4 states, which would have beaten the tri-state tornado of 1925 for the longest track of all time. Eventually, surveys broke the track apart into a family. And the Mayfield tornado was its longest and deadliest member. Half the country expected the EF5 drought to end right there. The survey teams graded the worst of the damage. Mayfield's flattened downtown, the swept foundations along the track, and their estimate came out at 190 miles per hour. EF4, 10 miles per hour below the EF5 line. 57 people had died, more than in any other tornado of those 12 years. And the loudest question in the country that week was, how exactly this was another EF4? 15 months later, on the night of March 24th, 2023, the country got its next controversial case. Another violent tornado, again at night, this time in the Mississippi Delta, a small farming town called Rolling Fork. In many ways, it was a rerun of Mayfield, a poor southern town, most homes with nowhere underground to go, and a storm arriving in the dark. Rolling Fork was home to about 2,000 people. The tornado killed 17 of them and erased most of the town in a matter of minutes. Houses, churches, the water tower, and a flower shop swept down to its concrete slab. The survey teams rated it EF4 with winds of 170 miles per hour. Then, 3 months later, something unusual happened. After a longer engineering review, the Weather Service raised the estimate to 195, a formal correction published quietly in the database that left Rolling Fork only 5 miles per hour below the EF5 line. The meteorologists who made the call admitted it themselves. This was about as close as a tornado can get to the top rating without receiving it. Mayfield had stopped 10 miles per hour below the line. Rolling Fork stopped 5, and by now, 2 more theories were making the rounds online. The first pointed at the federal government. An EF5 rating, the argument went, unlocks bigger disaster payouts, so Washington keeps the ratings low to save money. Except federal aid works the same way insurance does. It's based on the damage itself, counted in dollars and destroyed homes, and the number attached to the tornado rating changes none of it. Rolling Fork received a federal disaster declaration as an EF4, exactly as it would have as an EF5. The second theory was about geography. The South, it claimed, gets short-changed. The same damage that earns an EF5 in Kansas somehow earns an EF4 in Mississippi. That one, at least, sounded testable. And a year later, a storm in the cornfields of Iowa put that theory to the test. On May 21st, 2024, a tornado tore through Greenfield, Iowa, plains country, farmhouses, the old Tornado Alley side of the map. A Doppler-on-wheels research truck happened to be parked close enough to look straight inside the tornado, and what it measured went into the history books. Winds between 309 and 318 miles per hour, some of the fastest ever recorded on this planet. Only 2 other tornadoes had ever produced numbers like that: Bridge Creek in 1999 and the famous El Reno tornado of 2013. But Greenfield's official rating based on damage was EF4 with winds of 185 miles per hour. Karen Kosiba, one of the scientists behind the radar, said it plainly. There may simply have been nothing in the path capable of registering an EF5. So much for the geography theory. Iowa had just gotten the exact same verdict as Mississippi, and underneath all the theories sat a quieter truth. For the people in these towns, the rating never mattered. Nobody in Rolling Fork got their house back when the number moved from 170 to 195. A concrete slab looks the same under an EF4 as under an EF5. The letter only matters to the record books, to the scientists, and to the arguments online, which left our whole EF5 question in a strange place. By the summer of 2024, instruments had clocked 300 mile-per-hour winds inside American tornadoes 3 separate times. The wind had proven beyond argument what it could do. What the scale was still waiting for was a witness on the ground, something in a tornado's path strong enough and heavy enough to prove winds at the EF5 level. It took one more year, and then, on the night of June 20th, 2025, a tornado came down in the farm country of southeastern North Dakota a few minutes after 11 o'clock near a small town called Enderlin. It grew to just over a mile wide and moved across the fields in almost total darkness, 12 miles in under 20 minutes, through country so open that most of its path crossed nothing but crops. Along Highway 46, east of town, the tornado ran over two farmsteads. Michael and Catherine Dane, both 73, were at home in one of them. 89-year-old Macario Lucio was in the other. The tornado leveled both properties, and unfortunately, all three of them were killed. It was the deadliest tornado North Dakota had seen since 1978. Beyond those two farms, not a single person was even injured. The first survey came back with a familiar verdict, EF5, based on damage consistent with winds around 160 miles per hour. And that could easily have been the end of the story. One more violent tornado in open country. One more rating capped by everything it didn't hit. Except that this tornado south of town had crossed a railroad line, and there was a train on it. The tornado threw 33 rail cars off the tracks. Grain hoppers weighing 143 tons each were tipped clean over, and one empty tanker car, 36 tons of steel on its own, was picked up off the tracks and thrown 475 feet through the air. That tanker became the most important damage indicator in all of this 12 years. Wind engineers knew its exact weight and the exact distance it flew, so they could calculate how much wind it takes to throw that much steel that far. The answer came out above 266 miles per hour, far beyond the EF5 threshold. On October 6, 2025, after nearly 4 months of forensic work with wind engineers, the National Weather Service upgraded the Enderlin tornado to EF5, official winds greater than 210 miles per hour. It was the first EF5 in the United States since Moore 2013. And that, in the end, is the whole answer. For 12 years, America's most violent tornadoes kept coming down, where luckily, nothing could prove their strength. By the way, if you enjoyed this one, there's a video about the Cascadia earthquake on my channel you might like too.